What's up guys, Coach Highway here, and in this video today I'll be ranking all of the Overwatch 2 characters in order from least, D tier, to most difficult, which is the S tier. Before we get started, you should know that we have launched our website and it is killer. We've been cranking out the best content possible and we have 30 new videos coming in just the next few days. Myself and the other top level coaches at GameLeap have put a ton of effort into getting some excellent guides and courses done, so be sure to click this link here and I guarantee that you will love it. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into the list. We'll be going through all of the characters from bottom to top and by role, starting with the tank role, then damage, and then ending off with support. Starting us off strong in the tank list, we have Sigma, which is D tier. Sigma is a pretty easy to pick up hero. None of his abilities are particularly complex, and the hardest part about him is getting consistent with his weapon. Even if you can't land shots, it's hard to not get value by just using your shield for your team and doing some spam damage to the enemy tank. He is definitely a good tank for newer players to pick up. Next on the list is going to be Junkrat Queen, and despite her weak state at the moment, Junkrat Queen is also pretty straightforward as a hero. Her weapon is a shotgun, which allows for room for error, her knife throw has a very short cooldown and can get exceptional value for little work, and her axe is also not a particularly difficult cooldown to use. She has her own speed boost, which is pretty unique for a tank, and overall nothing about her is super complex. Also an easy hero for a new player, just be warned of her current weak state. Moving on into the C tier, we have ROADHOG, whose main difficulty comes from his large hitbox and lack of shielding from enemies, meaning he has to peek and land hooks quickly to avoid taking as much damage as possible. His hook has a medium length cooldown and he can be difficult to get lots of value with otherwise. However, he is also super self-sustaining and you can play him in lots of positions that are shut off to other tanks due to his sheer tankiness, C tier. Next is Orisa, and Orisa's abilities are all pretty powerful. They are all straightforward to get value with and have little complexity needed. She is also one of the few characters in OW who still has a stun, and her Fortify makes her immune to CC, allowing for her to push forward while being very resistant. Her weapon is also rapid fire and therefore gives plenty of room for error for newer players. Moving on into the B tier, we have ZARYA, and ZARYA dances in between the B and the C tier. Her biggest weakness is her lack of mobility despite her short range preference, which can trap a lot of players into overextending past their team. Despite this, however, she still is a solid tank with very straightforward cooldowns, but a need for good aim, timing, and positioning, which makes her skill floor pretty high. Next on the list is D.Va, and D.Va is a B tier pick since she has to be very observant in order to consistently get value off of her matrix. Her damage output is significant, but she also is a huge target and is easy to pressure out if she tries to go in solo. D.Va requires a lot of close positioning observation in order to pull off successfully, and she overall has a very high skill ceiling. This makes her a B tier pick. Next up is WINSTON, and WINSTON is a powerful fight engager and has decent self-protection with his bubble, which allows him to split off the targets he dives from their healers. The weakness of Monkey, however, is his massive hitbox combined with his inability to mitigate any damage aside from his shield, meaning heroes that stay and fight him can usually force him out pretty easily. Moving on into the A tier, we have DOOMFIST, and DOOMFIST is all of the same things as Monkey, but without the shield to protect him and with a weapon that requires more aim to use. He also has more complex movement than Monkey does, meaning that in order to get the full value out of DOOMFIST, you have to closely analyze and use his movement text to your advantage. This makes him significantly harder and puts him at the A tier. Note that right now I think he's just too weak to engage properly, and I'll expect he'll receive some compensatory buffs, which is why he isn't at the S tier. I'm trying to focus on the intended design of each hero rather than their current weak or strong state. Moving on up into the S tier, we have REINHART, and REINHART is one of the more difficult tanks in the game. He relies heavily on having a LUCIO to shore up his weaknesses, which feels unfair to include if not adjusting for the other tanks. He has no ranged options outside of his slow moving projectile, Fire Strike, which also puts him in a vulnerable position. His shield is centered on him, which means he needs to be able to balance shielding his team and being close enough to the enemy to deal damage when he can, and his Earth Strat area is blocked or avoided by a lot of things in this game, especially since you have to be around the same elevation as Rein in order to get shattered by him. He is one of the more interesting and difficult tanks to play, and we put him solidly on the S tier. The final tank on our list is going to be Wrecking Ball, and Wrecking Ball has tons of self-sustain when he gets into the middle of the enemy team. However, in order to engage, Wrecking Ball relies on lots of odd movement and physics in order to be super effective. His gun is also reliant on tracking, which can be notoriously difficult in close ranges, and his huge hitbox leaves him very vulnerable to CC and damage overall. Before we move on to damage, are you enjoying the video so far? Make sure to like and subscribe if so, and tune in for more good educational pieces. Alright, let's get back to it. Moving on into the damage tier, we start the easiest heroes off with Soldier 76. in the D tier. Soldier requires some aim, but so do pretty much any of the other DPSs. Aside from that, he has constant mobility, which makes his movement very forgiving to use, and his heal bed allows him to be out of position and still thrive at times. He also has a fair bit of range, and his rockets give him much needed burst or cleanup potential on his targets. He is a solid choice for new DPSs and thus ranks here on the D tier. Next up is going to be PHARAH, and PHARAH is a solid DPS, but her ability to sit super far away and in the air makes it difficult for most of Overwatch's cast to even contest her. Her rockets having fair splash damage allows for you to do lots of damage without even directly hitting your target. Furthermore, her rocket barrage has such a fast time to kill that as soon as you get close, you're almost guaranteed to get at least one pick on someone. She is a great starter projectile hero. Next, we're moving into the C tier, and our first character in the C tier is going to be Bastion. Bastion's main weakness is his mobility. His damage is very high and he can bust down tanks with relative ease. For the most part, Bastion is nigh unplayable unless you have a super high amount of team support. This is because your low mobility makes it difficult for you to chase down any kills, and it makes it easy for enemy teams to spam you out and then chase you down for a kill. That being said, his cooldowns and mechanics are all very straightforward and easy to use, and his lack of mobility makes his play one-dimensional and easy to understand. This makes him fairly easy to beat, but also easy to play. Next in the C tier is going to be JUNKRAT, and JUNKRAT is oriented mainly around dealing lots of damage and choke points and keeping the enemy team pressured. His aim isn't all too hard as his projectile size has been increased for Overwatch 2, and in many cases you simply need to throw your shots down to choke to deal a ton of damage. Junk has an insanely high accidental kill rate, and for good reason. This makes his skill floor very low and puts him here in the C tier. Next up in the C tier is going to be Mei, and Mei is a hero whose entire value is mainly based around one ability, Ice Wall. Ice Wall can be hard to land in some situations, but overall Mei doesn't have many difficult mechanics to her kit. Her Ice Blaster has no damage fall off and a very fast projectile which allows her to duel at range. Her Ice Block is a decent get out of jail free card combined with some healing for self-sustain. Her primary fire requires very little aim due to its very generous particle hitbox. This puts her at the C tier. Next up in the C tier is going to be Reaper, and Reaper is extremely straightforward. His weapons are shotguns which have a decent room for error for those who don't have phenomenal aim. His Wraith ability lets him get out of many situations that other heroes would simply die in. His teleport also permits him to close distance and surprise people on flanks that he wasn't on before. There isn't much insane mechanical complexity to him, which lands him here at the C tier. Our final C tier hero is going to be Torb. Torb's turret, which helps him duel hard to hit enemies, and his spam damage, which has no fall off, allows him to do a significant amount of damage from safety. Even if he doesn't have particularly good aim, his spam is good enough to keep tanks pressured, and his turret provides him with a helpful companion against hard to hit enemies like Tracer or Genji. His overload also acts as a panic button to save him in situations where he needs it. Moving into the B tier, we have Sojourn, and Sojourn is a very powerful hero right now, but that doesn't stop her massive need for mechanical skill. Her primary fire is a projectile, which means you need to lead your target to deal consistent damage, and her railgun is a one chance at a time weapon which can either lead to a pick or simply nothing at all. Her mobility gives her a much needed boost in ease of use since it's simply so strong that it's hard to catch her out of position. However, with all of this in mind, she's still very mechanics intensive, which lands her here solidly at the B tier. Next on our B tier is going to be Sombra. Sombra's translocator and her invisibility allow for her to easily get into the fight without being detected. She is a potent flanker, however her weapon requiring close range tracking and her need to take a steady amount of 1v1s makes her a difficult hero to play at times. But when all else fails, her EMP is strong enough that you can just do spam damage and eventually build it and use your EMP to get fight wins on repeat. This strategy alone lets her be a much easier hero and land herself at the B tier. Still mechanically intensive, but there are options if you're doing poorly. Next on our B tier is CASSIDY, and CASSIDY is a steady, solid hero with little complexity to his cooldowns. His main barrier to entry is going to be aim, which plays a massive part in his effective dueling. If you have good aim, there isn't much else to worry about on CASSIDY since he's just so simple as far as tech goes. With all of that in mind, he really just requires some good aim and some baseline positioning, and that leaves him here for me at the B tier. Next on the B tier is going to be Echo. Echo is really powerful and much like PHARAH can play in the difficult to contest air. However, unlike PHARAH, her damage is much more bursty, with most of her value coming from landing good sticky bombs combined with either her primary fire or her laser, and she has to know how to close distance in order to do this consistently. She can still play far out of range and spam to get some effect, but her bursty assassin style makes her a much more difficult hero to play overall. Next on the B tier is going to be HANZO, and HANZO's one-shot projectile makes him formidable at close to mid-range. The issue is he has little to defend himself from a hard dive at these ranges, which gives the enemy team a very simple path to contest him. His long range inconsistencies will drive him to take these mid-range fights more often, and that can be difficult to avoid being pushed and killed. With that in mind, he actually is a straightforward character with all of his cooldowns being based on pretty intuitive utility. He requires good aim to be effective, however, which leaves him here at the B tier. Next in the B tier is Ashe, and Ashe falls into the exact same boat as Cassidy. All of her utility is fairly straightforward, except her mobility is far superior to Cass's. Her damage is pretty steady as long as you have good aim. Once you have good aim, there's little else you need to do in order to get high value on her. Her low level of complexity allows for her to land here at the B tier despite the need for good aim. Moving into our A tier, we have Widow. Widow requires good aim and good positioning due to her lack of close to mid-range options for fighting. Her positioning, despite needing to be good, is at least pretty straightforward. Just keep large distances between you and the enemy and focus on landing shots. Her very high need for aiming is what keeps her here at the A tier, but due to the simplicity of her positions, I can't in good faith put her in the S tier. Next in our list is going to be SYMMETRA, and Sim is actually extremely difficult in Overwatch 2. She doesn't really fit any particular style since she has a low mobility and low burst damage, but also little range. To play Sim, you have to be extremely opportunistic and not force your fights before the right time. This makes her surprisingly difficult. Moving on into the S tier, we have our first character, Tracer. Tracer requires some of the most skill in the game due to her need for effective cooldown usage, positioning, and her very difficult mechanics. Her small health pool gives Tracer little room to make errors, landing her as one of our S tier DPSs. The last DPS is going to be Genji, and Genji's necessity to fight in close range means he has to find ways to get the drop on unsuspecting enemies or just be a very effective fighter mechanically. He has little self-sustain outside of his deflect, and if he misses his one-shot combo, he can find himself in trouble extremely quickly. This leaves him at the S tier for difficulty. Moving on to the support role, we start off on the D tier for the final time with MOIRA. MOIRA has a lot of self-sustain. Her fate is one of the best escape tools in the game, and her damage in a 1v1 can be really effective up until higher levels, and her kit is all extremely straightforward and effective. The character has little complexity and is a fantastic entry hero for support players. Going into the C tier, we have Brigitte. Brig doesn't require much mechanical skill and is one of the stronger support characters as far as sustain goes. Her repair packs keep her teammates up effectively, and her ultimate can translate into consistent winning fights. None of this requires much aim or positioning, which lands her solidly at the C tier. Moving on to our second C tier support, we have Mercy. Mercy doesn't require any aim realistically, but she can benefit from practicing occasionally, and she instead relies on her fast movement and ability to reposition quickly. Her kit is extremely straightforward at a basic level, but does have some movement tech that you can learn to increase her skill ceiling, and overall she doesn't really require balancing many things at once, which leaves her at the C tier. Bumping up again to the B tier, we now have Ana. Ana is a pretty mechanics driven hero, but her cooldowns are both very high tier. Her nade can be a good self-peel tool or offensive tool, or even a teammate saver, making it extremely versatile, and with her Ana nade trick, you can actually land your nades extremely consistently. Ana's far-ranged heals also give her lots of options for positioning, making her hard to play incorrectly. Going up into the A tier, we have BAP. BAP has one of the weirder weapons in the game, his burst fire rifle. When he fires it, it also has recoil, which makes it a necessity to drag your aim down a bit to compensate while firing. This adds a small but very noticeable layer to his aim, making him more difficult. His lack of horizontal mobility makes him an easy target to push and kill, and thus leaves him here at the A tier. Next in the A tier, we have KIRIKO, and KIRIKO is a newer support, and her aim can be extremely vital to maximizing her value. Her kunais deal 3 times damage on a headshot and are otherwise kind of weak. Her heals are mostly auto-aimed, meaning it is easier for you to at least get some value on her. Her mobility is teammate reliant aside from her wall climb, and thus makes her susceptible to dives. Due to her need to pay very close attention to her positioning and be landing headshots, she lands here at the A tier. And the final support we have in the A tier is going to be ZENYATTA. Zen is similar to KIRIKO in his need for good aim to maximize his value and with his automated heals. He is actually surprisingly similar to her, just without the higher headshot damage and the mobility. He is, however, super straightforward with his abilities compared to KIRIKO, which makes his skill floor relatively low. His simplicity leaves him right here at the A tier despite his need for good mechanics. Our final hero is going to be LUCIO, and LUCIO lands in the S tier. LUCIO's mobility is unique to him and requires a whole new set of skills. Look at some of the LUCIO rollout videos there are out there, and you can really see how in-depth his movements can get. He also has little heals, and his utility is mainly focused around his speed amp, which when timed poorly can ruin his entire fight value. He requires a lot of niche skills, leaving him our only support at the S tier. And with that, we have concluded our list. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like and check out our website in the description for more high-end educational content. Take care and peace.